right. It is June 1st. This is the PFF Forecast. We are going to talk football. We are going to talk about the AFC South today, do a little preview for the 2020 season, while at the same time looking back kind of at what the season was last year. Should be a lot of fun because this division has got a lot of interesting components, a lot of good storylines. At the end of the podcast, we're going to do a little reflection. We're talking about what has happened, but we know that you guys are often coming here for a little bit of getting away from what's going on outside. And for me, literally outside, because I'm on 16th Street in D.C., which is about 6 blocks out from the White House. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy out here. I saw a car literally crashed into a bank on my run this morning. But we'll get to that at the end. And we'll talk some football right now. And Eric, I understand that there was no football this weekend, but you're at home, you're alone, and you may or may not have bet on some sports that were. True or false?
Yeah, true. I did a little bit of dabbling into MMA, a little bit of NASCAR.
Yeah, you did.
The pit of misery though. So like the interesting thing is obviously, you know, like when sports are on, I have like a subscription to like everything, you know, Sling, Hulu, so I can like watch every game. But now I kind of have taken them away. So I'm to the point of like betting on NASCAR, but not actually wanting to watch it.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so like I'm like every like, you know, hour or so I'm looking at the leaderboard, you know, and usually they're just head-to-heads and stuff, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, it was okay.
Did you build a model or anything, or did you go somewhere to look at like any sort of
I just follow Twitter, and then there's like a couple ways, like, and maybe this is like instructive to football bettors too, but like, you know, if everybody likes a certain guy to win the whole thing, you know, maybe that's less of a value than betting him head to head, you know, against other players and things like that. That's mostly what I'll try to do is if a lot of people like a driver to win, I won't bet him to win. I'll bet him to beat like 3 or 4, you know, other drivers. And that generally seems to work. Or if somebody's fading a particular driver, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of the way I try to go about it.
You know, what's funny? The interesting thing that you said there was, I think a lot of people assume that if you bet on something, you're more inclined to watch it. And I believe that to be true, certainly. But there's a threshold very clearly, and you have found that threshold. And it's the same for me. The funny thing is, I don't know if I could bet on it without watching it. Like, I would feel so guilty having money on the line and not watching this stupid thing. Like, it would defeat the whole purpose for me.
Yeah, right? I actually don't have an issue with that. College football, for example, I think the majority of the time, I don't always bet on the big games. I generally speaking will bet on like the, you know, UAB, and maybe I'll watch the fourth quarter or something on ESPN Plus. But I think I'm maybe not the opposite. Like, I certainly like to watch the games that I bet on, but I don't. It's not a prerequisite, especially like a sport. Like, I actually really like the WNBA, but I don't watch every game, even though I probably bet on a significant fraction of them.
Please don't bring up the WNBA. I'm still getting over the Aces not coming through for us, and the Mystics when they won the championship. Okay, we're gonna get to the AFC South. I have to give a special shout out though. I did this last week, but my little sister Gabrielle is having another surgery today. She's watching, and it's in a couple hours. So just giving her a shout out, and going to be strong. Very excited for you. Hopefully it's the last one that she'll need for a while. So sure. I'm excited about that. And she is really pumped about the AFC South. I have no idea which team she's going to root for this year. And I'm not sure I do either. And that's, I think, one of the interesting things about this division is there are 3 teams at the top where they all have something really interesting and intriguing about them. With Tennessee, it's actually the result of our simulations that has made them the most intriguing to me. Indianapolis, of course, has Phillip Rivers coming in. It's this kind of whole new world for the Colts. And then Houston has the best player in the entire division and also lost maybe the second best player in the whole division this past year. So it's very interesting. Let's start with this, though. What was the most surprising thing to you that happened last year?
In this division, I mean, I think it was the fact that, the Titans actually did make a switch at quarterback. Mariota was, I mean, I don't know if you remember that Thursday night football game, we might have had a bet on Tennessee, like minus, 2.5 or something like that. And they were playing Jacksonville. And, the
quintessential Thursday nighter.
By comparison, Mariota made Gardner Minshew look like Joe Montana. And, they had a bunch of like just absolute stinkers. The Titans have been a team that has like profoundly frustrated me from the moment, I think, 3 years ago, where we had the over in the Tennessee-Kansas City game, and Tennessee comes back from like 21-3 down, but then doesn't cover the over by like a point because they missed a 2-point conversion. And then they a season ago, like they got on a hot streak. They got on a hot streak, and then they go and face Carolina, who has Kyle Allen at quarterback, and they don't even cover the spread. And then they get on a hot streak again, and then they lose at home to Houston, and then it was just a really weird season. Ultimately, Tannehill played extremely well, and it's one of those situations where, I'm going to write about it this week, but it pays to have a backup quarterback that has, some experience, because, the rest of that team was primed to be pretty good, especially with the schedule that wasn't particularly good for the Titans.
The Titans were obviously surprised for many reasons. I kind of struggled here to pick one, because on one hand, I was surprised by the Houston Texans seemingly being the same team they've been for the past like 3 seasons with Deshaun Watson. But I guess I really shouldn't have been surprised by that. And so my biggest surprise is actually A.J. Brown, who was awesome. And I think is one of the players that when you talk about the Titans, people want to talk about Ryan Tannehill and they want to talk about Derrick Henry, and maybe not in that order. But A.J. Brown to me is one of the main reasons we're talking about the Titans. And they have tried to find dynamic receiving threats for what seems like ever, right? And that was theoretically the problem for Marcus Mariota. He didn't have that dynamism out wide or in the slot. And A.J. Brown, once Tannehill kind of took over, found himself with a quarterback that could get him the ball and was just unstoppable. I mean, I think he had 20 missed tackles forced after the catch, which is tied for the league lead with Deebo Samuel, another rookie. And he averaged over 9 yards after the catch per reception, something crazy like that. It led the league. It was insane. He's nuts. And one of the reasons I loved A.J. Brown is interesting. I remember going back to pre-draft, and everyone loved DK Metcalf. And I was looking at a bunch of different things, because they obviously played in the same on the same team. And A.J. Brown's just way more productive and graded better in all these situations and all these different routes that are more common in the NFL. And I remember sitting in the office saying, like, I really think A.J. Brown's going to be better than DK Metcalf. Now, I'm certainly not right yet. DK Metcalf actually had a pretty decent season. But it goes to show you that, being productive in college does matter. And so I'm excited for A.J. Brown. He surprised me last year, but I'm just really excited about this year because now you have this division has been so bereft of offense, it seems like. And now they have 3 offenses that could be really exciting. And that's cool. That makes Thursday nights more fun.
Yes. I mean, you look at this division and you have, Brown had, under 100 targets, but turned that into 1,000 yards. You have Corey Davis, who I know he didn't get picked up, as 5th-year option, but he's a former top pick. On the Colts, you have Michael Pittman, you have Paris Campbell, you have T.Y. Hilton. Houston, you have kind of a bunch of receivers who are like each other. And then don't forget about Jacksonville. Gardner Minshew was the most valuable rookie a season ago. DJ Chark is a pretty good player. And then they get Tyler Eifert along with Jay Gruden, who has been a guy who has made players like Tyler Eifert fairly good in places like Washington. So when I look at this division, I think it's extremely interesting because I think the fulcrum is the Colts, right? Mm-hmm. Because, they're currently –
well, they're the favorite. Yeah, they're plus 125 right now.
Their win total is 9. They're plus 125 to win the division. We have them more about 8.2, but you kind of look at, okay, why would we be lower on Indianapolis than everybody else? Well, there's a lot of stuff that in Phillip Rivers' data that could suggest a bounce back season, right? Playing in a dome, he's playing with some, a good offensive line. He's, the division's relatively weak, although I'll push back on that finally.
Yep.
And yet he's aging and he's changing teams and changing schemes, and he's there's not, they're talented at wide receiver with the Colts, but as we're going to talk about down in a little bit, like a lot of their wide receivers were not valuable last year, and they dumped a lot of expected points and things like that with those players. So when I look at this, I think Indianapolis is one of the more overvalued teams on the market right now. And as such, you look at the rest of the division, Titans are undervalued at 8.5 and plus 175. I think Houston, 7.5 of being their win total and plus 300 to win the division. Like, yeah, they did lose Hopkins, and Hopkins is a big deal, but do you really want to bet against Deshaun Watson for an entire season? Like, we've made that mistake before, and it doesn't end very well. So, and then Jacksonville, I think 4.5 is an embarrassment for a win total. And when you look at like the incentives,
I agree.
You look at the incentives for that team. Marone's not a tank guy, right? Like, he's not going to want. It's not Flores, right? In fact, that Dolphins team got over 4.5. It's not a tank situation for guys like Minshew. It's not a tank situation for guys like Jay Gruden. It's not a tank situation for, as I said, Doug Marrone. So I think this is a division where, like, okay, if you believe us on the Colts, you have to sort of elevate every other team as far as the markets are concerned.
Okay. You said a lot of things in there that I agree with, and some that I've been wrestling with here as well. So let's start with the prohibitive favorites. And this is what I think is most interesting about this division. So the Colts are plus 125, the Titans plus 175. And after our simulations, the Titans are the team that we would have as the prohibitive favorite, winning the division over 40% of the time. The Colts at over 25% of the time, but a clear flip-flop, right? It's not like, we would have, a couple of percentage points different from the market. This is a significant, difference between what we believe and what the market believes. And I'm trying to kind of figure out the reasons why. And I look at Ryan Tannehill, and there are some things with his game, particularly how well he played under pressure, how well they leveraged play action last year, where you go, okay, these should regress back to the mean a little bit. But you're also hoping with the Colts that Phillip Rivers regresses back up to the mean a pretty significant amount. And I'm not saying that he can't, but I think that's really what it comes down to. Do you believe more in a Phillip Rivers regression up, or a Ryan Tannehill regression down? Or do you think that Tannehill can sustain a little bit of that magic? He's still a good player from a clean pocket. The sacks regress maybe a little bit back to the mean. And Phillip Rivers, who's getting older, is in a new place. Maybe Frank Reich and his ability to take Andrew Luck and say, hey, Andrew Luck, we're going to change the way we play football so you can succeed. That works for Andrew Luck, but it doesn't work for Phillip Rivers. I think it's really interesting trying to tease those two teams apart. Like, how confident are you, I guess, that the Titans are a better team than the Colts? If at all.
I'm not, because I think when you look at what's going to happen this season, I think continuity is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And, the Titans, Tannehill gets a lot of credit, and I think he should, because, Arthur Smith was there at the beginning of the season, but Arthur Smith returns, and he was a guy who did tremendous things for that offense once he got Tannehill into place. That maintains itself. They do lose, Jack Conklin, right? So then they have to go with Isaiah Wilson in his stead, and that might not be the best, thing for them moving forward. But they have a lot of weapons, right? Their tight ends are young and athletic. We talk about the wide receivers. Obviously, Derrick Henry's a guy who, as much as a running back can be a difference maker, he was whatever last season.
Yeah. Once Tannehill took over, he was fantastic.
And you look at their defense, like they got some players, That Christian Fulton's a player that I really like. Adoree Jackson was one of their top 4 most valuable players. Kevin Byard is pretty good. They got Jonathan Joseph, who has been a medical marvel really over the past few years, and I like it. And there's a lot of continuity there. With the Colts, there's just a lot of projection. Okay, their most valuable player last season was a guard. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have to assume that Rivers is going to be better than Brissett, but how much better? And they've always been elevated by coaching there. Is that really Frank Reich has Frank Reich used up the years of being this plus coach, right? Whereas if he doesn't innovate, he's going to end up being like McVay and Shanahan's still a positive guy. You know what I mean? Has he used that up, or is he going to continue to be an innovator? We've seen with guys like Doug Peterson, the first couple of years is a success, and then after that, it's sort of baked into the cake, right? And so is he baked into the cake now? I don't know. And at wide receiver, you need a bunch of. You need T.Y. Hilton to continue to be good, right?
Well, and he's had some injuries, right? You mentioned the projection thing with the Colts, and I'm trying to pick some of these players that I think are kind of crux players. And obviously Phillip Rivers is one. It's not hard to pick the quarterback. But looking at players that are non-quarterbacks who have a really important position, I think Michael Pittman has as interesting and as important a role of any player, non-quarterback player on any of these teams. Because he's a guy who he only dropped 5 passes and over 170 targets at USC. He's a really great route runner. He's separated at all levels of the field. He's a big guy, but separated at the intermediate level. And when I think about what Phillip Rivers, so last year, 74.3 PFF grade, was just 17th overall. The year before, basically 91, was the 4th best grade among all quarterbacks in 2018. Now, yeah, he had a little bit better of a time from an offensive line, but he had receivers that were really great. And so to me, as important as it is that the Colts have an offensive line and Frank Reich, he dropped Andrew Luck's time to throw from 2.8 to 2.5, and that fits right in with Phillip Rivers' wheelhouse. If they don't have receivers that can get open, the same frustration that you saw with Phillip Rivers last year, I think is going to happen again. And that's why Michael Pittman is so interesting to me. The other thing about these two teams is I look at their drafts, and I know we warned people last week, don't get too caught up in the whole draft thing. Both these teams made some really interesting decisions in the draft and also drafted guys that we thought were fantastic values, like Christian Fulton, in the 2nd round for the Titans, on the heels of Isaiah Wilson, who were maybe that guy's a guard, and they picked him in the 1st round. Right. The Colts go get Pittman. Obviously, they traded their 1st round pick. They go get Pittman. We're like, oh, that's great. And then Jonathan Taylor in the 2nd round, and there that video surfaced of them debating were they going to take Pittman or Taylor. So there's all these really interesting things. I keep coming back to, man, not only do I think these teams are close, but do we really believe there's a cluster of those two and then the Texans? Because as much as I love DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that was one of the most disastrous trades on the planet, I still think Bill O'Brien, the coach, is a decent coach, and Deshaun Watson is an amazing player, and they still have the potential, when healthy, to have a pretty good wide receiving core. So this is a fascinating division for all of those reasons.
Right, and I was thinking about this the other day, and I wonder where I come down on it, because defensively they were an abject failure a season ago. When you look at their least valuable players, Lonnie Johnson was minus half a win above replacement.
Yep.
You had Philip Gaines, the former Kansas City Chief. You had Aaron Colvin, who didn't even make it through the season. They got to do some things to get better there. They lose Jonathan Joseph. They do get Eric Murray and Jalen Watkins, who are Michael Thomas actually, so a bunch of safeties in the mix. But they have to be better, right? They're going to need, Vernon Hargreaves to play well. They're going to need Bradley Roby to play well. But at the same time, they were able to win double-digit games a season ago and a playoff game without having a good defense. Even if it's sort of a Kansas City sort of argument where if they go from being a 30th in the league to 15th just by regression and strength of schedule alone, then because they had one of the hardest schedules a season ago, so they go just back to the middle of the pack in terms of defense. Then I think 7.5 is good value if you're looking to bet on a player that a lot of us like. He's imperfect, and Deshaun Watson, but he really is a player that allows those around him to rise above circumstances.
Yes, and that is I think one of my favorite bets here. In thinking about the division title, I'm a little less. I think 3-1, plus 300 for the Texans is nice. When I look at 7.5 wins, and I just think about Deshaun Watson, and you imagine, okay, what happens for you to go under that? It's like, okay, he doesn't make it to 500. And I have just there's like this giant wall that I can't see it. Deshaun Watson is on one side, and below 500 records are on the other side. And I don't see Deshaun Watson ever like jumping over it. Yeah. He's got that will to him where you're like, man, I just feel like he's going to make it happen. And here's an interesting thing that I have been thinking about with the Texans, and I want to know what you think here. So DeAndre Hopkins is amazing. And I keep coming back to what Kyle Shanahan said when he left Atlanta. And they said, hey, are you looking to bring in a guy like a Julio Jones, like a receiver like that for the Niners? And he goes, I really don't believe that to win in this league, you need one of those studs. It's more about having guys that can fit what you want to do, having depth there, being able to put guys in different positions and win. And I'm not saying – I hate it when people are like, yeah, addition by subtraction, like he gets better. But I'm wondering if the subtraction isn't nearly as big because now Deshaun Watson realizes, hey, I need to get rid of the ball more quickly. Like I can't just like wait, take on all these sacks, allow pressure to get in my face. I need to win quickly because I don't have a guy like a DeAndre Hopkins there who's always, going to bail me out. I can't wait to get into 3rd and 5 because I don't have DeAndre Hopkins, who I know is going to win every single time at the line of scrimmage. So I could see this situation where Deshaun Watson's really takes the team, puts it on his back. I think he's a dark horse MVP candidate, and I think 7.5 wins just to me feels like something Deshaun Watson is not going to creep into because he's got that ability to change the way he plays.
I don't agree that it's an addition by subtraction. I do agree that –
well, good, because that's not what I'm saying. I really wanted to be clear. I don't feel that way. I just think that it's not always a, hey, we took the most valuable non-quarterback out of your team, and that's going to take you from division winner to garbage.
Yeah. I don't think it's worth 2.5 wins. And the hard part with me with the DeAndre Hopkins thing is he had been the only quarterback for whom he wasn't successful was Brock Osweiler. I mean, he was successful with Brian Hoyer. He was successful with Ryan Fitzpatrick. He was successful with Matt Schaub, I believe. That was that 1 year with Schaub. And then obviously Watson. And so when I look at this, last season he was already lower in terms of depth of target. On passes to Hopkins, they were quicker. Like I thought Hopkins was like doing his part in terms of being part of the solution. Mm-hmm. So I cringe a little bit when I hear, maybe they got rid of him because, they want to get rid of the ball quicker and, Hopkins is sort of more of that big body, like, backyard football guy. Because I do think he was part of the solution last year. But at the same time, like, far be it from me. I mean, when you look at the receiving core, you can do a lot worse than Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, Randall Cobb, and Kenny Stills.
Yeah, and I'm
you can't. I mean, and David Johnson. We don't like to talk about running backs, but David Johnson, if healthy, along with Duke Johnson, I think are some players that can make catches out of the backfield and be players that, in that sort of backyard type football that he likes to play can get those yards.
I'm a growth mindset guy, so I always like to believe, people are really quick to think accuracy is like the growth, hey, I believe he can get better as an accurate football thrower. It's like, okay, like let's relax there for a second. But Andrew Luck's a great example, right? He's a guy who in the right structure took the time he held onto the ball from like top 5 in terms of longest to average time to throw to one of the quickest. To me, that is something that, certain players, if they get it in their head, can like figure those things out a little bit. And that would be a huge win for Deshaun Watson, who has basically had a sack rate, I think, over 8% in every single one of his seasons. But you mentioned this thing about DeAndre Hopkins, and this is hilarious. I tweeted this back in May 13th. May 13th feels like it was 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's just like 90 days ago.
DeAndre Hopkins has 1,065 targets. 658 of them, that's well over half for you guys that forgot your TI-89 at home, are from quarterbacks who are not starting caliber QBs, like just period, point blank, are not quarterbacks to be starting in the NFL. He finally had a good quarterback, but it's only been for the past couple of seasons. The guy is like a legit top 5 wide receiver and has not had a QB in the top 32 aside from Deshaun Watson. So I know he's not in this division anymore. But like he is certainly a loss, and he can be a huge loss while at the same time Deshaun Watson can have to look in the mirror and say to himself, I'm just going to have to do some things a little bit more efficiently to make up for it that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise. And so that's why, I'm bullish here. You look at Deshaun Watson, 81 PFF grade last year was 9th. 83 the year before was 12th. His rookie season was really up and down. And really he only had like 2 really bad games last year, maybe 3, I guess. But he's just a guy, when I look at those other 2 guys in Tannehill and Rivers, and you think about like, okay, in their worst game, how bad are they? I know that Deshaun Watson's game against the Ravens was unfortunate and was bad. But like Deshaun Watson to me feels like the guy with the highest floor.
Yes, I agree. I think in his worst games, he's so like the hard part is we always compare him to Mahomes and Trubisky, and
right.
It's sort of like he's head and shoulders above.
What's bad about being compared to Trubisky? I'm trying to get that comparison. I always get compared to guys like you. I want Trubisky in my comp.
He's nowhere near as good as Mahomes, but he's like, nowhere near as bad as Trubisky. And so we think of him as like smack dab in the middle, when in reality, no, he's far closer to Mahomes than he is to guys like Trubisky. And sure, he does have bad games, but Mahomes is such a revelation in that he doesn't have bad games that we sort of, I think, knock Watson down a peg when maybe we shouldn't.
We have Houston going over their 7.5 win total about 60% of the time. I think the over though is a little juiced. Is it -120 now?
Yeah, I mean it's still a positive EV bet if you believe.
It's still a bet that I am/have made. Let's talk
how confident, because so if you're in this world, right, and you say, okay, I'm going to be all over the Texans and the Titans in this division.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, like the play. But then, like, if the Colts go 13-3, right, and that's where the issue really is, right? But that's kind of what we would advise, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I was going to say, are you basically – is your theme for betting this division literally fade the Colts? Because we've talked about the Titans. Our simulations really like the Titans. We would have them as the favorite. Vegas has them as the second favorite. We just talked about the Texans. And the Jaguars, look, 4.5 wins is a really, really low total for a team with a legit starting quarterback, a couple of options at receiver. They drafted in a way that, look, it could really not be great. But they drafted guys in their first 3 picks in Henderson and Shenault, and honestly in Chason and Barch too, who, they're all really high variance guys, but one of those guys being good makes a legit difference for this team. You talked about DJ Chark. Gardner Minshew was a guy who was really accurate last year, and I know the shine wore off at the end, but dude was one of the most accurate throwers of the football downfield, over 1 win above replacement, not too far off from a lot of very good quarterbacks and some of the ones in this division. So are you legitimately saying, yeah, my whole theme for this is just fade the Colts?
I think that's the logically consistent one.
It sounds like what you're saying.
Interestingly, this is why betting numbers early is a good thing, because I'm sort of looking at my sheet right now, or like things I've liked or written about.
Your sheet, what is that? Is that like a note? Is that a greasy notepad? Is that a napkin?
It's where I write my trends. No, Houston under 8.5 was available like middle of March,
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you can get a gauge on this. So like there's a situation where they go 8-8, you get a middle there. It's not as, obviously, these things aren't fixed in time or whatever, but it's important to sort of think about, by the time we get to the end of the season, or even, right now they're probably beaten to death anyway, but it's important to think about these from a time varying perspective. And, if you sort of believe that Rivers was going to be signed by the Colts, it was a good number to get.
So here's my question with the Jaguars. I kind of wrote down a question for all of these teams. And the one for the Jaguars is Gardner Minshew going to be good enough to get the tank out of Jacksonville? Because it seems like everything aside from Gardner Minshew and DJ Chark are, and that includes the coaching staff, are just like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to be a part of this team when we win. Right. And that can go south so quickly. And I just wonder how much is everything in Jacksonville and everyone surrounded with that team that knows they're going to be there long term sort of hoping this happens. Because if you think about winning a Super Bowl in 5 years, you're probably envisioning Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields and not Gardner Minshew as the person that is holding up the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah, we talked about this, when we were talking, when we looked at the draft, right? Mm-hmm. And the draft was one of those where it was like, Jacksonville took a lot of like long shots. Like, CJ Henderson is probably not as big of a slam dunk as Derrick Brown, but if he hits, he's going to be way more valuable than Derrick Brown, right? Mm-hmm. They did a lot of, Chenault was another one in the same vein. So I don't know. When I look at their schedule, take a look. So they're at home to the Colts in week 1, right? Like, we've seen.
Can I just tell you what's going to happen in those games, and we can see what their record ends up being?
But they're home to the Colts in week 1, and we've seen a ton of times where where week 1 is just a bunch of surprises, especially when you have a road favorite like the Colts are going to be. And then they go to Tennessee, home to Dolphins, at our Bengals, right? Mm-hmm. Like, because to me, okay, where does this? If you bet over here, where does it have no chance? Well, it has no chance if they start out 0-5 and they fire Doug Marrone, right? Like,
Yeah.
So when I look at, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like, if they win, like, let's say they start 2-2, they beat the Bengals, they beat the Dolphins, or some combination of that. Then they're, they have a home game against Detroit, which could or may or may not be good. They have a home game against the Browns. They have a road game against the Vikings, who could be, relatively weak, and they have a home game against the Bears. There's a bunch of winnable games on that schedule. It just, to me, you're going to know right away whether or not they're going to win 5 or 6 games, like, right away, in my opinion.
No, I think that's a good call. And the interesting thing about that first game against the Colts is the Colts are not going to be stressing out. I don't see the Colts coming out. It's not in Frank Reich's nature to sort of be freaking out. Yeah. And they're also a team that, and this fits right in with kind of Phillip Rivers, and I just expect them to be kind of a slow-paced team. And maybe I'll be dead wrong there, but it seems to me like they're going to keep teams in games. So if you're looking ahead to week 1, you're going like, what are some underdogs? And you look at some teams playing at home, you go, man, like Gardner Minshew's not that bad. DJ Chark's not that bad. Maybe they're playing in Jacksonville. Like, I would assume if there was a place that teams were still going to be able to play come September, it's going to be in Florida.
It just reminds me, though, of last season when Tennessee played the Browns, where the Browns are even at home, but like the Browns were the hot team that everybody thought, was a foregone
right.
they were going to be.
Was that 5.5?
They were 5.5.
Yeah.
Tennessee was a good side to be on, but even then, like, it was just, there were so many things that needed to be acclimated for Cleveland that we all saw football as as a bunch of parts, and Cleveland failed to be the sum of the parts. And like, I think it's insulting to put Frank Reich in the same sentence as Freddie Kitchens,
obviously.
But there's a lot of characteristics there. You're breaking in a new quarterback. He's got to play with a new team and a new scheme. You got a defense that, like, I mean, the Colts defense just kind of makes it, right? Like, there's not a lot there. And so, like, I don't see it as big as
Xavier Rhodes solving those problems?
Well,
no.
Right, exactly. That's a pretty, like, I think that's a fair question to ask. Is Xavier Rhodes solving those problems? And the answer probably is invariably no.
Yeah.
They got rid of Pierre Desir. Like,
he was one of their better corners.
He was one of their better corners. I mean, there's a lot to be questioning the Colts for. And for me, it's just, there's no way I'm going under 4.5 when I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I could very much go over. Maybe the play is to bet on them in the first few games, or maybe it is to bet the over and bet against them in the first few games, so you get kind of like a hedge there. But I don't hate them.
Well, I would say that I would guess there will be a little value on them in their first couple of games. So I don't know. Maybe if you're not one that wants to wait for the whole season, you can just bet on those first 2 games instead of taking their win total. You just reminded me when you mentioned trends that Tennessee was a part of one of the greatest trends ever uttered into the ether by Clay Travis.
Did you see his co-host on Lock It In get after him on Twitter?
No.
Okay, well, you'll have to watch that.
I will go seek it out. I try to avoid those sorts of things. But it was, I believe, in both of their playoff games, and including when they played the Chiefs, but it was like they were like 6-0 against really good offenses, like offenses that averaged over, some monstrous yards per play. It was like, yeah, good luck with that one, buddy. Okay, let's wrap this up. Are there any other things that you're betting in this division that we have not yet talked about? Like, are you putting a little? Are you giving a little taste on the Titans to go to the Super Bowl?
That is a bet I have made, and one that we wrote up as a part of the win totals piece. Well, they're just part of.
It's an emotional hedge, is what it is.
It's not an emotional hedge,
yes,
but it's more of a. What were they, 60-1 when I bet?
Look, I sat next to you for 3 hours at a Super Bowl where you didn't say anything. I know the emotion that courses through those Kansas City Chiefs veins of yours.
The hardest well, I mean, one day we'll write a book about that day. Just the emotions, me flagging a cab.
I was gonna say, how many chapters are us just looking for a fucking Uber?
Well, you were distraught. So both of us had both of us went through all the phases of grief, right?
Oh,
and then
my God.
I ended up getting one, and I honestly stood like this for 10 straight minutes after I found out that they were going to win. And then, then we're trying to find a cab, and you're irritated because your team blew a 10-point lead, and then
our Uber blew us off.
Our Uber blew us off. We were willing to pay an Uber like $150 to get back to the hotel. So you have to admit my speed was impressive.
Yeah, I'll just really quickly sum this up for the people that are like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? The line for Ubers outside of the Super Bowl was from Miami to Jacksonville, as you would expect. Our Uber that you got on your phone, because both of us are trying and you're the one that gets lucky, says, meet us here. And where he wants us to meet us is not where they will allow you to stand for an Uber. So we're like hopping fences and getting yelled at to try and find where the Uber is. We're still trying, and the guy just ditches us. So now we have no chance of getting an Uber. We're nowhere near where the Ubers are, and our only hope is a cab. The cab line is supposedly down this way somewhere, and we just keep walking. We must have walked 4 miles, not a cab in sight. We finally see a cab. My phone's out of battery. your phone is barely alive.
Yeah.
And
I forgot that.
we see one cab, and you from like 2 lanes over, only someone that just won the Super Bowl could have made this move. Ducks, like dives and dodges a car, squeezes between 2 other cars, and gets in front of the cab, and it's like, wait.
I slapped my hand on the side window. I probably broke a finger.
Oh man. But I digress. I am with you in the sprinkling of a little bit on the Tennessee Titans to go to the Super Bowl. It just, especially in a year where I think things are probably going to get a little wacky. They are a value. We have them making it all the way to the Super Bowl about 10 or a little over 10% of the time, which is
I mean,
way,
the AFC
way higher
is so top heavy. So
exactly,
if you chop the 2 legs out from under the Ravens and the Chiefs, I think they're probably a value. That's the thing. I mean, you can't just bet on the favorites. The favorites don't pay that much, and they often go down, as we saw with Baltimore last year.
All right.
So should we go from talking about our fake plight at the Super Bowl to the real plight of the world right now?
Yeah. So here's I want, a lot of people are talking about it, and I always think it's useful to give a little bit of context if you have an interesting connection to things. And I wanted to ask you, because we haven't had a chance to really talk about this. You are from Minnesota. And despite us talking about the Chiefs, you have many, many, many stories about the Vikings and going to games in Minnesota for just about every sports team. And so, coming from that lens, what are some of the ways that you've reacted and thought about what's happened?
Well, it's hard because these things are all about being heard, right? And I think most people's longing in life is to be listened to and to have their the things that they're going through be recognized. And we've seen this happen in the country. I mean, Freddie Gray, I believe in Baltimore. We had the issues in St. Louis. We had the issues in Baltimore. We even had the issues in Minneapolis with Philando Castile, which is again very raw still, even though it was a couple of years ago. And so.
Ferguson,
right? When the officer for Philando Castile was not convicted, there was significant outcry in the African American community in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And when this happened last week, it was oh, here we go again, right? And I understand, and I fully empathize with people who do not want their stuff looted, who do not want their businesses destroyed, and so on and so forth. However, the issue is we've had peaceful protests in this country before, and they fell on deaf ears, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think like everybody right now, whatever side you're on, just wants to be listened to. And I think that for people like us who are privileged to have a platform and things like that, like my biggest thing is I'm ready to listen to anybody, and if it comes down to and we're obviously going to talk about where we're going to donate, but for me, it's we understand the pain and we understand what people are going through, and even with that, our experiences are limited, and we want to listen to people who are struggling.
You hit the nail on the head. What makes this so sad is it's not new, and all of the things that are happening and the feelings that people have and the emotions that people are going through on literally every side of every aisle anywhere have happened before. And I'm sure in 2 weeks, maybe even less, a large majority of the people that are ranting and raving about things are going to have moved on. And that's what makes this so sad, is it is continuing to happen. It continues to happen often. And it's going to, in my opinion, right, the reactions are just going to be more visceral as these things continue to happen, and change isn't progressing in a way that people want. And it's very interesting. The pervasive feeling that I have had is honestly one of guilt, and we're both very lucky. I've never felt like when I got pulled over for speeding, I was gonna be in danger of my life. And I actually, when I graduated college, I did Teach for America. We've talked about this a bunch. And one of the reasons that I did was I was very lucky as a kid to have played basketball in an area called East Palo Alto, which was, almost entirely Black and Latino. I was the only white kid on this team. And I saw that they just don't have any of the opportunities for an education that I took for granted. And I'm not a teacher anymore. And I can't help but see these things happen and feel like, shit, I'm part of this, I'm part of this problem, right? Like the reason these things keep happening, it's not because the tweets that people are shooting out there rapid fire aren't making a difference. Right. Like, I hate to break it to you, but those fucking tweets are not helping anything. It's the systemic change, the hard work, the going and becoming a teacher, the going and working in these areas that need help, the working with people that are trying to cross the aisle that ultimately changes things. And, that's what pisses me off. That the looting, it's weird. I feel like watching the looting is, it's disturbing, and it's people from like all over. It's a really weird thing. And we're kind of conflating it with a lot of the peaceful protests, which is unfortunate. But like the looting isn't, it's not going to help things change, but it's an expression of emotion that people like just don't know what to do. And that's what's sad.
We've ignored. I mean, and I'll push back a little bit. Earlier today when you were expressing, regret over the fact that, in a few months that we're all going to forget that this has happened. Right. And I showed you the tweet that I had from 2014 where I was sort of wrestling with, the very real thing. And I was like, back then, like I had very different views and talking and you talk about being an educator and, the being a teacher was really an important part because you dealt with people who had many walks of life, who had assumption spaces that were so much different than yours, and you had power over them. Mm-hmm. And there was that situation, I think, fundamentally alters you. And it's why, coaches have a responsibility. It's why politicians have a responsibility. It's why anybody, and why law enforcement has a responsibility to have empathy, because if we don't, we're going to take, everybody just takes their own assumptions into things. And again, it's a product of not listening. And, we had years ago, however people felt about Kaepernick or whatever, I mean, they were protesting in a way that made us uncomfortable, but not as uncomfortable as it did. We didn't do anything as a product of that uncomfortability. And now, I think, rioting and looting, it's an open question as to whether this will have any impact, but it's more likely to have an impact if we all have to share in the common fear that people of color, when they interact with the police, that this might be the end. A lot of people are thinking, okay, this might be the end for me now as a product of this rioting and looting.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. And I don't think it can be underscored. And it's unfortunate that, these things are messy. Like, that's the other thing, that you're never going to make it somewhere better without getting a little dirty. And, it's unfortunate because it's at a time when so much that doesn't need to be political is political. This isn't political, like, at all. This is human. This is fundamental to what it is to be a human on this planet. And everyone has to work towards these better goals. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, a Democrat, or whatever the hell you claim to be. That needs to be thrown out of the way. And we are, unfortunately, like, the way that we've made it in life is to be like, you have to be selfish in a certain way. And a lot of people continue to act selfishly. And until some of that gets beaten down and people start to dedicate themselves to real change, we're gonna struggle. I mean, it's tough. I really think that the greatest accomplishment, like, if you ask me, what's the greatest accomplishment you've ever had in your life, I would go back to, being a teacher and thinking about, some of the kids who did really well in an AP calculus test. Like, that can help. What am I doing right now? And that's what I've really wrestled with, is like, is donating, is that doing enough? because it feels super cheap. And I haven't, gone on Twitter because it just, those things where you say, hey, like, I'm with you guys, here's this tweet, like maybe you can frame it and it'll inspire you to like be a better person someday, just doesn't get the job done.
The hard part is that, as you said, everything is messy, and all the people groups we've been a part of, whether that be football analytics, which is predominantly white, or our churches, which have contributed a fair amount to these issues, all that kind of stuff. Like, we all share responsibility in this, and the people who are rioting and looting, eventually, right, there's going to be a point where responsibility is shared by them too. Yeah. And the part of like, we've taken history and we've so like bastardized it to the point where people don't remember that Martin Luther King was hated like by 75% of Americans before he was killed, and we all like to think of like he walked up to people of power, spoke truth, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's a great point, let's change. That's not that didn't happen.
That's not how this works.
And that's the same thing here. Like, and that's, I think, the hard part is that, no matter what political party you're a part of, no matter what ideology you live by, we always demand perfection out of the people that we don't like. Yep. And accept imperfection out of the people we do like. And that's, that's going to be a tough thing that we all have to overcome.
Yeah. And it shines a light on how in this day and age, it's really easy to feel like you've done something. And oftentimes I think we do things because it makes us feel better. And the things that are really going to help people, as you just underscored, are not going to make us feel great in the moment. Like that's I think these conversations are tough. And so here are the things that I think that I think I can do to help, and maybe sharing this with the few people that are listening will help them as well. To me, having conversations with people, not on Twitter, but friends and people that might be on different sides of the issue, or maybe that aren't doing things to help or feel as though they don't need to, can be really useful. Reaching out to people who are obviously in pain and have dealt with these issues. If it's a former student or colleague or something like that, mm-hmm. and then donating to places that are going to put like things in action, right? Put your money where your mouth is. I'll go ahead and read off the places that I've donated. My girlfriend has been donating as well. The first is the Loveland Foundation. They provide therapy for Black women and girls free of charge. The Know Your Rights Foundation, which is Colin Kaepernick's foundation, which provides legal assistance to those who need it. The Fair Fight Foundation, which fights for fair elections. To me, that is one of the places. Helping people vote is a systematic change that you can help make. And then last but not least, Teach for America, which obviously I'm a part of. No organization is perfect. I know they've caught flack in the past, but they put people who want to teach kids in situations that kids would normally never get that opportunity. And, it was one that gave me a great chance.
Yeah. And, at being from the Twin Cities, our friend, Justice Mosqueda, he started the thread of people donating to the Minnesota Freedom Fund. That's one that I think is a great place and one that I'm donating to. And here's another one. And again, I don't want this to be overly political, but I'm going to donate to the COVID-19 Response Fund because we're still in a global pandemic. And I know that churches, and I know that some things have opened up and a lot of us have enjoyed those. I went to an outdoor only restaurant the other day and really enjoyed it. But the fact is that there might be a spike in COVID-19 cases just due to, the protests and the proximity that we're all, and that's the hard part. As you said, this is all very messy, and the protests had to happen in some people's minds and frankly in my mind, but COVID-19 needs to be taken seriously in my mind as well. And so what we can do is try to help there. But again, hopefully we approach this, as well, the way that, that would, encourage all of you just to listen to other people and to try to be the change, obviously, and try to understand things from other people's perspective, because we only have one life, and that's, again, where our perspectives are from, but they're obviously limited by the fact that we only live once.
It's well said, and it's not about you or me or any individual. It's about all of us together. And so thank you to all of you guys for hanging out with us and listening. We hope you guys enjoyed the football content, and hopefully you guys are doing your part to make this world a little bit better each and every day. If there's anything we can do, obviously reach out to us. We appreciate it. We'll get back to kind of a little more normalcy in terms of a few more segments and a guest. Next week, we have Seren Petro, one of the greatest people in sports radio.
He's on Thursday this week.
Yeah, he's one of the greatest people I've ever met. He is awesome. We're going to talk AFC West. He is a Kansas City sports radio legend, and he's going to come join us, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So come hang out with us on Thursday. Stay safe. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out.